DevilNeverCry.
What is up everyone, it is me DevilNeverCry, and in today's video I want to go over 5 things that I want to see in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, ranging from the small, minute, inconsequential details all the way up to some of the larger scale things that would have quite an impact on the game itself. It feels like it was only a couple of weeks ago that we got the latest trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at Summer Game Fest, despite it being well over 2 months ago, and with the end of the year and Q1 2024 fast approaching, I thought it'd be a good time to dive into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and talk about what I want to see. Starting off with the first thing, which perhaps could be considered inconsequential, but it is Chocobo breeding. We know for a fact that Chocobos are going to be a part of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, not just because the end of Intermission and its cutscene where the party is actually picked up by Choco Bill, but we also see the Chocobo farm in Rebirth's latest trailer. It comes as no surprise that we're able to ride Chocobos around the open fields, taking us from one location to another, but I sincerely hope that they keep Chocobo breeding this time around. Some of my favorite and perhaps most frustrating memories from playing Final Fantasy VII as a child was going for the gold Chocobo, and the lengthy process involved in ultimately breeding one. And so with a new generation of gamers getting to experience Final Fantasy VII for the first time with this entire trio of games, I hope that they keep the overall Chocobo breeding minigame, and they keep the quest for the golden Chocobo as arduous as it was in the original. How are you doing, Mr. Cactuar? Well, I'm doing pretty good, Mr. This video has been sponsored by Insert Coin Clothing. Insert Coin are a clothing brand that are dedicated to making some of the sickest stuff out there when it comes to video games. From coats to socks to even pins and patches, they create a bunch of unique pieces of clothing across a wide range of different video game IPs. And they even ship worldwide. I'll leave a link to their store in the description below, and be sure to use the code on the screen now to grab yourself 10% off. With that said, let's get back to the video. Moving on to what I want to see next in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it has to be Zack. Despite not seeing Zack fare all too much in the original Final Fantasy VII, it's safe to say that he plays a large part in the overall ethos of the FF7 compilation. Our protagonist Cloud Strife literally wouldn't be who he is without Zack. And I think this importance of character is perhaps reflected a little bit more with the overall new trio of Final Fantasy VII games, starting with the remake, where we see Zack play a more pertinent role in this so-called alternate timeline. I, like many other Final Fantasy fans out there, of course want to see what exactly is going on with this alternate timeline. How and why did he survive, and what were the repercussions of him doing so? Going even beyond that, however, I want them to give us Zack in a playable form. Maybe it's because I've been playing a little bit too much Crisis Core, but part of me actually prefers Zack more as a character than even Cloud. But I'm hoping that we get some sort of playable sequence, even multiple at that, as we follow Zack on his own sort of side quest throughout this alternate timeline, as he comes to grips with a world he doesn't recognize, remembering of course that he was captured and experimented on by Hojo for several years, and ultimately on his quest to find Aerith. Pressing ahead to what I want to see next in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we gotta talk about the gameplay, particularly the stagger mechanic, which of course is going to be returning, albeit I hope that they end up making a few alterations. For the majority of Final Fantasy VII Remake, I didn't really have all too much of an issue when it came to the stagger mechanic. The entire game was designed around it, quite well at that, and it worked quite effectively, forcing you to strategize and cash in all of your damage after whittling down an enemy stagger. The main issue that I have with the stagger mechanic pertains largely to bosses and the loss of resources as a result of phase changes throughout a boss. There are bosses in Final Fantasy VII Remake and even in the Intermission in which, once you get their health down to a certain point, a mid-fight cutscene will play out to signify that you are in the next phase of said boss fight. The issue that I had was that whenever a phase change occurred, the stagger bar would be emptied out entirely, reverting all of the progress that you'd made. Coincidentally, if you end up using a limit break, and perhaps right at the very start or even midway through your limit break attack, if you trip through that phase change health value, you basically wasted the rest of that limit break and lost out on some much needed damage. It's the small things like these that left me feeling a little frustrated and deflated during a boss fight in which I should be amped and excited. The easiest way to alleviate a frustration like this is to better signpost on a boss's health bar when a phase change is likely to occur, which would ultimately allow you to strategize and plan your attacks more thoroughly. That being said, however, when it comes to the combat, I'm glad that Square have taken these synergistic attacks from the Intermission/Intergrade DLC, which allowed you to directly combine your attacks with one of your party members, complete of course with a stylish animation, to wreak havoc upon all you face. The next thing I want in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a fully customizable party. In FF7 Remake, whoever you had in your party was directly tied into whatever chapter you currently were in. I think the only caveat to this was in one of the VR missions late in the game, I think chapter 16 or 17. But overall, not knowing the structure of FF7 Rebirth, whether it'll stick to the chapter structure of Final Fantasy VII Remake, whether it'll be more open, and not knowing how far in the story it will go and which characters we're going to be able to essentially recruit or have in our party, I'm hoping that they will just let us pick who we're able to fight with at any given point. With of course some restrictions similar to the original game in which you couldn't have certain party members due to specific story reasons. And the final thing that I hope to see in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as silly as it sounds, is the snow game or the snowboarding, particularly because of the tonal whiplash it provides considering what happens in the story perhaps only a few minutes before. The game goes from a super serious moment, quite shocking at that in the original, particularly if you weren't expecting it, to a jovial moment of levity as Cloud and co. shred snow down the side of a mountain. That is of course if that moment is even going to occur. That of course is a whole other discussion in and of itself, but if it does, I can perhaps see Square Enix moving the minigame to perhaps a later date, or rearranging the order of specific events so that you don't go from that super serious mode into absolute joy. And those are 5 things that I wish to see in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There are a few other things I can think of off the top of my head that I wish to see that perhaps I might cover in another video, but I did try and cover a range of wishes, so to speak, that were both large and small in scale. Let me know down in the comments below, however, what you want to see in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and whether there's anything on this list of mine that perhaps you may or may not agree with. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I would like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.